last but not least, so we discussed a lot about how the left has seen collapses not only in Germany, but even in Israel. As we discussed, the Israelis have had their own issues with ousting their right-wing leaders. We do need to discuss Peru. So right now, there is a massive breakdown in Peruvian society and Peruvian politics, and we have seen that quite a bit in the past 4 years. Now, I, of course, did a segment on this last week, what happened in Peru, but it's heating up as we get closer to the election, which is June 6th, this coming Saturday, maybe? So, this election has been extremely, extremely fraught. It was between, it is between Pedro Castillo, who is this article calls him a hard left populist. It is definitely possible to call him a communist, but I will refrain from doing so. Instead, I will probably call him a Marxist because he is quite literally a Marxist. Not in any, fear-mongering way. I'm not actually making any claim about him being a communist, but he is a Marxist, and that is true. So, he wants to nationalize multiple industries, he wants higher taxes, which is fine, and he wants a new constitution, and he also wants to decrease the power of copper companies, which is good, by the way, especially if you live inside Peru. It definitely would be a very interesting economic proposal for you. However, this is something that has been run on by a lot of different people in the region. So, for instance, Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela as well, Evo Morales and Luis Arce in Bolivia, and this may or may not work out. In Bolivia, it has worked out in some extent, and in Venezuela, it has definitely not. So, these different anxieties are leaving some Peruvians a little bit upset with Castillo. Some Peruvians don't want to support Castillo because he may be a communist and he may turn Peru into Venezuela or Bolivia or Cuba. However, there is a different question to note here, and it is the fact that his opposition is no savior. His opposition is Keiko Fujimori. Fujimori is a right-wing Fujimorist, to use a term. Fujimorism is a neoliberal ideology. I use neoliberal in the original sense, meaning that she supports deregulation like her father. Her father was Alberto Fujimori, sometimes called El Chinoche, meaning the Chinese Pinochet. Basically, Chino is, by the way, not a slur in Spanish-speaking countries. Chino is actually a term of endearment. But Chinoche, being the Chinese Pinochet, Pinochet was a right-wing dictator in Chile who was probably best known for his dogs that committed sexual assault on people and his helicopter rides for leftists. Leftists were being tossed out of helicopters in the Pinochet government, and Pinochet was also brought into power in a American-backed coup against a duly elected socialist president, Salvador Allende, by the Nixon-Kissinger administration. That being said, the Fujimori government probably wouldn't be a good thing, just because Fujimori is not a great leader. Fujimori was extremely corrupt, and probably, and not only was he corrupt, he also committed human rights abuses. So Keiko Fujimori is not Alberto Fujimori, that should be noted, but Keiko Fujimori has a lot of the same support that Alberto had, and she is willing to oppose Castillo on the grounds that Castillo will be a Cuba or Venezuela type person. Castillo seems more likely to win, and the economic indicators basically show that that is not great for Peru. Right now you're seeing a massive dump of Peruvian cash. The Peruvian currency is called the sol, and the sol is depreciating in value, which is similar to inflation, but not really. There's a lot I could go into. I'm an international monetary economics major, so I can go into that, but I'd rather not. Basically, Peru is having many issues occur to it at once. You have a major recession, you have major unemployment, and if you have unemployment and inflation at the same time, that is perhaps the worst thing that you can have. So there is massive capital flight. People are leaving Peru with all the money they can, and they're trying to put it into the dollar, into something more stable, so that the Peruvian sol, when it inevitably inflates, when it inevitably depreciates, there will be less of an impact for them, which that's not great for the average Peruvian, but for the wealthy, yeah, they drop the money and leave. So the important thing to know in international economics is that what's more important than what actually happens on the ground with economic indicators is the expectation of what will happen. That's extremely important for exchange rates and interest rates. So when that happens and people expect Peru to be a weak country economically in the future, that actually portends a weak economy in the future, and that's not great for Peru, of course. So you have an increase in capital flight, which leads to a decrease in investment, and that in itself can cause major issues for Peru. And we will see what occurs with that in the future. We'll see if Peru becomes the next Venezuela, as Keiko Fujimori likes to claim. But let's be very clear, Fujimori is not necessarily herself this great leader. Fujimori was arrested, I believe, on corruption charges. I don't think she was ever brought up on them, but she was arrested on corruption charges, and she may or may not pardon her father. There are a variety of different issues at stake with the Fujimori-Castillo election. I'm not going to make any endorsement, of course, because I don't live in Peru and none of you do. So most of you who actually care about the election or either think it's interesting or you're probably LARPers. So regardless, let's just leave it there and say we're going to discuss Peru in the future, depending on what happens to it. If you don't hear about Peru anymore, it probably will be a good thing. But if you hear about Peru in the near future, it may be a bad thing. So let's continue to listen to what is happening in South America, especially as the Peruvian elections take place on June 6th. Of course, if you'd like to know more, you can, of course, go to In Progress with Raymond Perez. You can find it on Spotify, Google Podcasts, basically anywhere you get your podcast, you can find it. And we did an episode where we did like a 20-minute or maybe even 30-minute segment just breaking down the Peruvian election so that you know what happened in Peru beforehand and what happens and what's happening now. Where we discuss Fujimori, we discuss PPK, we discuss Vizcarra, and a variety of these different, and Marino, of course, and of course Sagasti, who is the president right now. We just discuss a lot of these different people and the problems that they caused for Peru or that they tried to fix and then got impeached 4 times for. So yes, this Peruvian impeachment scandal is really interesting. Go back and watch it if you haven't. And we will see you next week where we discuss the Peruvian elections and their outcomes. However, of course, the show is still continuing, so look out for the next segment, which is on our favorite grifter. Yes, I'm using the G word, grifter.